Chapter 1. Crooked Hill, 1871. The house was not marked on any map. To the east of Marrow Creek, where the road turned from stone to dirt and the fields of rye bowed low to the wind, there stood a hill with no name. Only the local children called it Crooked, for the way the trees bent away from its slope. No one in town ever climbed it, not anymore. But Annalise Fletcher did not heed local silence. She had been walking since sunrise, gathering dried herbs and seed pods along the fence lines, her basket nearly full. Her boots were caked with clay, and the hem of her skirt caught in the underbrush. But she paused when she saw the structure perched atop the hill. 3 stories tall, weathered gray boards, a porch sagging like a broken jaw. She frowned. There had been no house there last autumn. Her father had taken sick during the harvest, and she had passed this very way, carrying bread to the Haywards downriver. She would have seen it. And yet, there it was. Its roof sloped oddly against the skyline, its corners not quite square. The uppermost window stared blankly into the midday sun, and hanging above the porch was a wooden shingle, nearly faded to bare grain, save for a phrase carved deep in rough hand. The harvest keeps what it's owed. Annalise stared, lips parted slightly. The wind at her back had stopped. Even the brush seemed to wait. She stepped forward, not out of boldness, but because she could not seem to stop herself. There was no gate, no road, just brittle grass and the suggestion of a path. The closer she drew, the more the air took on a strange scent. Not rot exactly, but damp earth, like a root cellar left open too long. Her fingers brushed the banister as she climbed the 3 steps. The wood was cold, though the sun was warm. The door stood ajar. Inside, nothing stirred. She placed one hand on the edge and pushed it gently open. The hinges did not creak. There was no sound at all, just the smell, stronger now, familiar and wrong, like grain just before it spoils. She crossed the threshold. Behind her, the wind rose suddenly, then dropped, hard. The door shut fast without a touch. Chapter 2. The First Room. The silence inside the house was not natural. It pressed in close, thick as wool, muffling even the sound of Annalise's breath. Dust hung in the still air, undisturbed. The floorboards beneath her boots felt too firm, as if they had been nailed in only yesterday. But the wallpaper, once striped blue, peeled in long, curling ribbons from the walls. Cobwebs hung like old lace across corners and the tops of doors. It looked abandoned. It felt paused. The room before her was a parlor, though no fire had burned in the hearth for years. A gray armchair sat near the window, facing out toward the fields. A small wooden table beside it held a cracked teacup, still half full. Flies drifted silently above the surface, not dead, just slow. Too slow. Annalise stepped forward and nearly gasped. The rug in the center of the room was made of wheat stalks, braided, woven, and pressed together in a tight circle. At its center sat a single bundle of corn, wrapped with a ribbon of red twine, a harvest token. She had seen such things before, tokens left in barns and windowsills, meant to keep the fields from spoiling. But this one was different, too perfect. The corn glistened faintly as if dew still clung to it, and the ribbon was damp. A sound drifted down from above, slow and deliberate. A single footstep on the floorboards overhead. Annalise froze. She had been alone, she was sure of it. Another footstep followed, then silence. "Is someone there?" she called, her voice small but steady. No reply, just the creak of another step, heavier this time, as though the house itself shifted beneath its weight. She turned back to the front door. It was gone. Not closed, gone. Where the door had been was now blank wall, wallpapered and seamless. Annalise took one step backward and then another, heart hammering. Her eyes scanned the room again, teacup, chair, rug of wheat, and settled on the far door just beyond the hearth. It was open now. She was certain it had been shut. The corridor beyond was narrow and dark, and breathing. Not the house, not herself. Something in the dark. She held her breath and listened. One inhale, one exhale. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic. Something waited there, watching. Chapter 3. The Corridor. Annalise stood at the edge of the doorway, rooted in place, her pulse loud in her ears. The sound of breathing from the corridor was unmistakable, wet and careful, like someone hiding in straw. But there was no movement, no footsteps, just breath. She reached into the pocket of her cloak, her fingers brushing the bone-handled penknife she always carried when foraging. It was dull and small, more useful for slicing stems than offering defense, but the weight steadied her. The corridor beyond the parlor was narrow, its walls warped as if the house had shifted after construction. The floorboards sagged toward the center, and there were no windows, just a line of closed doors on either side, none marked. The only light came from a single oil lamp affixed to the far wall, its flame low and steady despite the absence of oil or spark. Annalise stepped into the hall. The moment she crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped. Her breath came out in a faint mist, and the silence changed. Not absence of sound, but listening. The house was not just still, it was expectant. She passed the first door on her left. Its surface was covered in shallow scratch marks, not clawed, but carved, long horizontal lines like tally marks, dozens, hundreds. On the right, a door slightly ajar. She peered in quickly. A child's bedroom, small bed, wooden toys, a rocking horse tipped on its side. In the corner, dried husks of corn arranged into crude dolls, all facing the wall. The whispering began behind her. She turned sharply. Nothing there. But now the corridor had grown longer. The lamp on the far wall seemed further away, and the parlor behind her had faded, its doorway now only a dark square. "No," she murmured. More whispers. Low. Urgent. "Owed. Never paid. Planted wrong." Annalise gritted her teeth and walked faster, then broke into a full stride, her boots striking the warped boards with dull thuds. The hallway twisted as she moved, curving slightly, impossibly, until the lamp drew near again. She reached it and paused to catch her breath. There was another door here, this one different from the others, painted black, its handle a simple iron ring. No scratches, no cracks, just a single word carved at eye level in careful script. Seed. Before she could stop herself, her hand was on the ring. Behind her, every door in the corridor slammed shut at once. The lamp went out. She turned the handle, and the door opened inward into pitch black. From within, something whispered her name. Chapter 4. The Root Cellar. The voice was not loud, nor cruel. It spoke her name like a question, curious, soft and dry as dead leaves. Annalise. She stood at the threshold, staring into blackness. The air that drifted out was cold and damp, thick with the scent of soil, mildew, and something fainter. Sweet, almost floral, like wilted lilies left in a sealed box. She should have turned back, should have demanded the walls return her door, or shouted until the house itself relented. But her body betrayed her. One step forward, then another, and then the black swallowed her whole. The ground beneath her changed. Floorboards gave way to packed earth. Her boots sank slightly with each step, the squelch muffled by the sheer silence. The penknife in her hand felt smaller here. After a moment, light bloomed. A faint yellow glow emanated from the ceiling. No lantern, no flame. Just a sickly phosphorescence, like the glow of fungus clinging to rot. It revealed walls made of clay and root, pulsing slowly, almost imperceptibly. Roots like veins. Roots that moved when she didn't look directly at them. Ahead, the cellar widened into a chamber. Rows of small burlap sacks lined the far wall. Each was carefully labeled in a child's handwriting faded with time. Maize, barley, rye, teeth. She blinked, read it again. Teeth. The sack twitched. Annalise stepped closer, dread blooming in her chest. The bag was tied with twine, but something inside shifted, pressing against the burlap in soft, rhythmic movements, like breathing. There were more sacks, a dozen, maybe more, all sealed, all marked, nails, hair, tongues. The whisper came again, closer now. You planted wrong, child. Annalise spun. A figure stood at the opposite end of the room, tall, dressed in the tattered remains of what once might have been a parson's coat. His face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but his teeth caught the light. Too many of them, too white. He didn't blink. This house feeds the field, he said. It keeps what's sown. I didn't sow anything, Annalise said, the knife shaking in her hand. You came, he said simply. You opened the door. That's seed enough. Behind her, the sacks began to writhe, the walls pulsed, the roots crept, and from the earth below, something began to push upward. Chapter 5. The Seedling. The ground gave a wet sigh beneath Annalise's feet. She stumbled back as the soil in the center of the cellar cracked and bulged. A pale shoot pushing upward through the dirt. It twitched as it grew, unfolding in jerks and spasms, not like any plant she'd ever seen. Its skin was slick and glistened in the dim fungal light. Veins ran along its sides. At its tip was no leaf, but something that pulsed, like a heart. She turned to run, but the parson blocked the exit. You can't leave it undone, he said, his voice quiet and heavy, as if it carried centuries behind it. You opened the seed door. You entered beneath the harvest line. This isn't real, she hissed, backing away. It's always been real, he replied. The field doesn't care if you believe in it. The roots at the base of the walls began to stretch, slithering across the floor like blind fingers. They wrapped around the sacks first. The ones marked teeth, hair, and tongues were dragged inward, torn open. Their contents spilled into the dirt. Not crops, not offerings. Remains. The growing stalk twitched at the offering hungrily. Its pulsing tips split open like a husk, revealing something slick and red inside. An eye. A human eye. Annalise nearly screamed. The parson knelt beside it, whispering prayers in a language she didn't know. The seedling turned slightly, its single eye locking onto her. She felt it, not just the gaze, but something pulling at her bones, her memories. "You bring it nourishment," the parson said. "You've seen the shape of the house, the curve of its roof. Its roots dig wide. It remembers every footstep. It remembers every bloodline." He extended a hand, and something long and thin writhed in his palm. Another ribbon, red and damp. "For the binding," he said. "No," she gasped, staggering backward. "No, I'm not part of this." "You were born here, weren't you?" His smile was thin. "Your mother, the fever in 53. She came here for help. She took something that wasn't hers. The debt carries." "I didn't know," she whispered. "That doesn't matter." The root at her heel curled up, touched her ankle. She bolted, shoving past the parson with a burst of adrenaline and panic. She hit the earthen tunnel hard, scrambling toward the dark with only the feel of the walls to guide her. Behind her, the eye blinked once, slowly, and the cellar whispered, "She's not ready yet, but she will be." Chapter 6. The Drought Path. Annalise ran without grace, clawing through the tight tunnel, the roots scraping at her skin as if reluctant to let her go. The air grew warmer the farther she fled, less like a cellar, more like a kiln. Each breath burned her throat. Her hands found purchase on rough wooden planks as the soil gave way to flooring once more. Then, at last, she burst into a room. She collapsed to her knees, coughing. Her face was wet with sweat. Dirt smudged across her sleeves. She looked up, slowly, blinking against the dark. It was not the parlor. It was not any room she had seen. This room had no windows. Its walls were lined with shelves, and upon those shelves sat jars. Dozens of them, each carefully sealed, each labeled in the same childlike hand from the cellar. She crawled toward one and lifted it. Inside floated a preserved sliver of flesh, small, curled, pinkish white. The label read, "Tongue, first lie." Her hand trembled. She set it down. Another jar. "Left hand, unblessed labor." And another. "Ear, heard what should have been kept quiet." Annalise staggered back and turned, desperate to find another door. The one she had come through was no longer there, just a wall, just shelves. From the far side of the room came the sound of wood creaking under weight. A soft step. Then another. Not rushed, not uncertain. Measured. She gripped the penknife again, but it felt like a toy. A woman stepped into the thin light. She wore a linen shift, yellowed with age. Her hair was long and gray, coiled into a braid that hung down to her waist. Her face was too familiar. "Mama?" Annalise breathed. The woman stopped. Her eyes were milky, unfocused. "No," the woman said softly, almost regretfully. I carried you in me, but I'm not what came out. Annalise backed away, heart hammering. The woman's mouth twisted into something between a smile and a grimace. You've grown into good soil, she said. Behind her, jars rattled. The room began to warm again, the air thickening with the scent of damp stone and crushed roots. Why am I here? Annalise cried. The woman took a step forward. Because every field needs tending. The walls behind the jars began to ripple, and the jars, one by one, started to crack. Chapter 7. The Breaking Glass Crack. Another jar split open. A pale fluid dribbled down the shelf and onto the floorboards, sticky and slow. Crack. 2 more. Then 3. Then all of them, one after another, like a rhythm, a harvest heartbeat. Annalise pressed herself against the far wall, covering her mouth with a trembling hand as the jars burst one by one. Their contents spilled into a thick pool that soaked into the floor, releasing a coppery stench that turned her stomach. Something in the liquid writhed, fragments of bone and sinew twitching, like they remembered what they had been. The woman, the Not Mother, watched calmly, unfazed by the ruin. You were supposed to return, she said. You never should have left the hill. I didn't come back, Annalise said. I never lived here. The woman shook her head slowly. You don't understand. You don't remember. But the house does. From the walls, roots began to press through the wood, thin, red-veined tendrils forcing their way in, curling around shelves and floorboards like they'd waited for permission. Annalise backed toward the corner, stepping in the muck without realizing. It clung to her shoes, sticky as molasses. What do you want from me? The woman's eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. Her voice dropped to a guttural rasp. You were the seed. The walls groaned. The house was moving. A crack opened in the floor, not a trapdoor, not a crawl space, but a split, as if the house itself had exhaled and something underneath had woken. Through it came a sound, not whispering, not breathing, but chewing. The woman's feet began to sink, slowly. Her body slackened as the floor took her back, boards curling around her like fingers. She showed no fear. You'll understand when it's your turn, she said calmly. All daughters do. No, Annalise said, shaking her head. I won't become part of this. The woman's mouth split into an impossibly wide smile. You already are. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Annalise hurled a shelf down, smashing the remaining jars. Glass exploded across the floor as she leapt toward the only remaining wall not yet overtaken by roots. She kicked hard. Once. Twice. Wood splintered. And then, light. A break. She threw herself through the gap, landing hard on packed earth outside. The house didn't follow. But behind her, from every window, dozens of pale faces watched in silence. Some were children, some were her. Chapter 8. The Field That Remembers. Annalise ran. She didn't remember the path, only the blur of dirt and stalks, the rasp of dead wheat slapping against her arms as she pushed through the overgrowth. Her breath came in ragged pulls, lungs aching from dust and rot. She didn't stop until the crooked house vanished behind her, swallowed by the hill's slope and the reach of the trees. Only when she collapsed at the edge of the clearing did she realize how quiet it had become. No birdsong, no wind. The fields surrounding Crooked Hill stood perfectly still, every stalk upright and unbent. She lay there a moment, trembling in the warm light, hands caked in dirt and fluid she didn't want to name. Eventually, she rose. She was out. That was what mattered. But the hill behind her hadn't changed. From a distance, the house looked ordinary again, dilapidated, empty, like it had always been. She returned to town before nightfall, her dress torn, her boots ruined. Her father, weakened by illness, didn't ask questions. He watched her closely, though, his eyes not filled with confusion, but recognition. "You saw it," he said quietly that night by the stove. Annalise froze, ladle in hand. "What?" "The house. I hoped you wouldn't. You knew it was there?" He looked down at his hands, gnarled and shaking. "It comes back every few years, when the crops grow dry, when someone's owed." "Who built it?" she asked, voice shaking. He didn't answer. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees, but not the fields. The wheat stood still. "Someone always goes in," he said after a moment. "Some come back. Most don't." She wanted to scream, to curse him for saying nothing, but in her bones she already understood. The house was not a place. It was a memory, a debt, and it had remembered her. Chapter 9. The Cold Room. The first sign that the house wasn't finished with her came 3 nights later. Annalise awoke to the sound of rustling paper. She sat up slowly in her bed, the room lit only by the weak glow of a dying lantern. The sound continued, soft, steady, as though someone were turning pages in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Her father slept across the hall. The farmhand was gone for the season. She was alone. The sound was coming from downstairs. She rose, each floorboard groaning slightly under her weight. At the foot of the stairs, she paused. The sound had stopped. But the parlor door, the same room that had always stayed latched shut since her mother's death, was open. It hadn't been the day before. She stepped inside. The room was colder than it should have been. Frost lined the inside of the window panes, though the hearth sat cold and empty. On the writing desk near the wall, an open book lay waiting, a family Bible. Its pages fluttered once, then stilled as she approached. A ribbon of red twine marked a passage near the center. Her breath caught. The words had been crossed out, ink blotted and smeared by a heavy, angry hand. Beneath it, in a more delicate scrawl, a line had been written in charcoal. "The field keeps what the house remembers." Behind her, the rocking chair creaked. She turned slowly. It rocked gently back and forth, as though someone had just stood up from it. But there was no one there. Then she noticed it. In the seat, nestled carefully where a child might rest their head, was a small bundle of dry wheat, bound in red thread. A harvest token, just like the one from the house. She backed away. Her skin prickled. The air smelled faintly of damp soil again. Then the door closed softly behind her. Chapter 10. The Visitor. Annalise stood still, heart drumming in her chest. She reached for the parlor door and found it latched. Not locked, but closed with a quiet firmness that hadn't come from her. The rocking chair creaked once more, slower this time, as if rocked by a long-forgotten rhythm. "I didn't bring anything back," she whispered, to no one, but even as she said it, she wasn't sure. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The house was dark, quiet again. But the quiet had changed. Before it was still. Now it felt withheld, like the house was holding its breath. She didn't sleep that night. By dawn, she had wrapped the harvest token in cloth and buried it behind the barn, far from the hill. She didn't tell her father, but the next night, just past midnight, she woke to knocking. Not on the front door, on the window. Her bedroom window faced the back pasture, Nothing should have been there. No trees, no porch, just frost-covered grass and distant dark. The knock came again. 3 soft raps, then silence. She pulled the curtain aside, bracing herself for some grotesque shape or ghostly child, but there was no one. Just the field, pale in the moonlight, empty. Then she saw it. In the frost on the glass, someone had drawn a single perfect circle, and in its center, a crude bundle of stalks, a harvest mark. She didn't scream. She didn't even breathe. She wiped the frost away with the edge of her sleeve. The mark disappeared. But when she stepped back, she saw another circle drawn on the mirror behind her. And faintly, just for a moment, her reflection blinked before she did. Chapter 11. The Root Line. The next day, Annalise didn't speak. Not at breakfast, not during her chores, not even when her father asked if she was unwell. She simply nodded, as if that might keep the truth from spilling out. But that night, as the wind scraped dry leaves against the window panes and the oil lamp sputtered low, she returned to the mirror. It was clean now. No frost, no symbols. But when she looked at herself, really looked, she noticed it. A thin red thread tied around her wrist. She hadn't put it there. She pulled at it gently, and it gave like a fresh vine. It wasn't thread at all. It was root, soft and living. She stared at it, heart hollowing. And then something shifted behind her reflection. Not in the room, only in the mirror. The shape of the house, its windows, its doors, the way its walls had moved, changed, shifted beneath her feet. It was happening again, but only in the glass. The house wasn't just remembering, it was becoming. Something passed behind her in the reflection, a figure in the hallway, thin and tall, coat trailing behind like torn linen. No sound, no weight. She turned. The hallway was empty. But the scent had returned. Earth and root, and the faint sweetness of something rotting too slowly. The mirror pulsed once, then cracked. Not shattered, cracked. A hairline fracture from corner to corner. She backed away, heart pounding. Down the hallway, the parlor door creaked open again. No draft, no footsteps, just invitation. She did not want to go. But she did. Chapter 12. The Hollow House. The parlor door stood ajar like a mouth partway open, waiting for her to speak first. Annalise stepped over the threshold slowly, each board beneath her boot groaning in recognition. The air inside wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, wet, and close, like the inside of something alive. The hearth still stood empty, but ash had gathered on the floor in the shape of a footprint, not hers. The Bible was gone from the writing desk. In its place lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed and thin. She unfolded it with careful fingers. No words, just a charcoal drawing. A tree with no leaves. Its roots stretched deep underground. Beneath it, drawn like a blueprint, was a house. The house was under the tree. She stepped back, skin prickling. A low creak overhead. Then another. The slow drag of weight across the floor above. She'd heard that sound before. She stepped out of the parlor into the hallway. The house stretched longer than it should have. Shadows pooled where they hadn't been moments before. The staircase waited. She climbed. At the top, the door to her mother's old sewing room stood open. It had been locked since the fever. Inside, everything was untouched. The wooden table, the treadle machine, the pincushion shaped like a strawberry. A shawl hung on the back of a chair, one she remembered from childhood, though she'd never seen it again after the burial. She stepped forward, and the moment her fingers touched the fabric, she heard a breath behind her ear. Not wind, breath, a woman's voice, familiar and dry. You were meant to stay. She turned quickly. No one. But in the mirror above the sewing table, there was a second shadow beside her own, slightly taller, still, and its hand rested lightly on her shoulder. Chapter 13. The Room That Waited. Annalise didn't move. The hand on her shoulder, only visible in the mirror, was light as dust, but its presence pressed into her bones. Not pain, not warmth. Claim. I didn't choose this, she whispered, eyes still locked on the reflection. Her voice felt smaller in this room, as if the house filtered her words, absorbing what it wanted, discarding the rest. The shadow beside her didn't answer, but the mirror changed. It no longer showed the room she stood in. Now it reflected the hill. The house, this house, stood atop it, but different. Not broken, not weather-worn. Whole. Windows gleamed. Smoke curled from the chimney. The fields were golden and wide. Children played in the rye. And a figure, herself, stood at the front gate, smiling. Alive. Settled. And deeply, terribly wrong. Behind that smile was a stillness, an emptiness, as if everything inside her had been carved out and replaced with good manners and silence. Annalise stepped away from the mirror. The vision held, refusing to break, but the light within it dimmed, and she began to notice other details. The children's feet did not touch the earth, their shadows did not move, and the crops around them bent not to the wind, but to something underneath. She turned from the mirror and left the sewing room. At the end of the hall, a door she had never seen before now stood open. Beyond it, stairs descending not to the ground floor, but deeper, beneath the house, beneath everything. The breath returned, circling her ears. You were planted, not born. The red thread at her wrist tightened. She looked down and saw that the root had crept farther, past her hand, twining around her fingers like a creeping vine. Under her skin, faint lines branched outward like cracks in old porcelain. Her time was thinning. But at the bottom of those stairs, she knew, was choice. Not freedom, not truly, but understanding. And she had to see what waited in the root of the house. She lit a lantern from the hall wall and descended. Chapter 14. What the House Remembers. The staircase wound deep into the earth, far deeper than any foundation should allow. The air grew thick, each breath like drawing in soil. Roots threaded the walls now, pale and pulsing softly, as if remembering her, as if recognizing her return. At the bottom, the stairs ended without ceremony. No grand chamber, no altar. Just a low earthen room shaped like a seed pod, narrow at the edges, swollen in the middle. At its center stood a chair made of wood and bone, and in the chair sat herself, or something close. The figure looked up. Her face, her eyes, her mouth, but wrong, too calm, too settled, like she had been waiting down here, becoming the version the house had shaped from everything Annalise had left behind. "You've come back," it said, not a greeting, but a fact. Annalise didn't speak. The root on her wrist throbbed faintly. The reflection leaned forward. "You don't belong to the world above," the other Annalise said. "You never did. She tried to take you away, but blood answers soil." "I'm not part of this," Annalise whispered. "I'm not." "You opened the door," it replied. "You stepped into the memory. You walked the root line. You buried the token." "I buried it," she said sharply. "I rejected it." "That was the sowing," the voice said gently. "This is the harvest." The earthen walls pulsed around them. Behind the chair, the wall split open. Inside was not dirt, but a void filled with hundreds of shelves, lined with jars, like before. But these were different. Each one held a single flickering light. Lives, trapped moments, forgotten choices. And among them was one jar still empty, waiting. Annalise stepped forward. She touched the chair. It was warm. The reflection stood, offering it to her. "It's easier if you choose it," it said. "Harder if the house decides." She looked down at the roots beneath her boots, the red thread on her skin now faded. And then she turned. She ran. Up the stairs, through the house, out the hall that stretched too long, through the parlor, into the front door that should not have been there, now open. She didn't look back, not even as the whisper followed her. "You'll come home. They always do." Epilogue. Annalise left Marrow Creek before the next frost. She never returned to the hill. But sometimes, in late October, when the rye fields sway without wind and the moon is heavy above the trees, she wakes in her small home, far away, convinced she can smell the house again. Earth and ash, and something sweet beginning to spoil. She checks her wrist, still bare, still clean. But she doesn't plant anything, and she never, ever keeps mirrors.